I'm Andrew Willett for A Pro Basketball Show. Follow and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, as well as following on social media at APBShow on Twitter and Instagram. Be sure to follow me as well at whackiest. Thank you so much for tuning in, and without further ado... So today we will live in Fantasyland on A Pro Basketball Show. I'm so excited to be welcoming in. He is the man behind the WNBAlien, and that is Richard Cohen. Richard, you do a lot of great work writing and for Her Hoop Stats, and I'm just so excited and grateful that you'd be joining me here. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Good to be here. Looking forward to making some stuff up that could never actually happen.
Amen to that, because, today we're going to say screw it to the CBA. We're going to think of some out-of-control trades that could never, ever happen with the trade deadline coming up this Monday, and that's August 7th. So this will be released right up to that point, real close to the actual trade deadline. Of course, a lot of this could not happen. And Richard, real fast before we get started, could you explain why a lot of these trades never in a million years?
Well, the primary reason is that at the end of a trade, for it to be legal, both teams have to be under the salary cap. And most teams in the league are currently over the cap. So it's difficult for you to do the maths and then have both teams end up under when over half the league is already over. Basically, it means Indiana would probably have to be involved in anything legal that could happen by the end of tomorrow. And yeah, even that's looking unlikely.
Okay, yeah, that I didn't even think for a second about like multi-team trades, but today we're gonna go through 12 teams, and I do want to start somewhere, but 12 teams will go in order from like top of the standings to the bottom of the standings, and I tried to dip myself to save it to like one trade for each team, but I had a few different ideas that I wanted to get your thoughts on as we go through this episode. But I did want to start with Skylar Diggins-Smith, who first and foremost, just want to preface, I hope she's doing well. I hope everything turns out all right for her with the Phoenix Mercury. I believe I saw that she is likely to become a unrestricted free agent in the offseason from a tweet that you shared.
Pretty much has to become one. Yeah, hard to find a way that she wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. So it becomes interesting to see if anyone would be willing to trade for just a few months of Skylar Diggins-Smith, knowing that it's not for certain that she's locked into a contract for your team. But do you see where are you on Skylar Diggins-Smith? Do you think a trade could happen at the trade deadline, considering she is currently not playing with the Phoenix Mercury? Do you have any favorite teams in terms of that?
Well, I think under the actual rules, it's very unlikely. With our premise of throwing away cap math and all of that sort of stuff, one of my possibilities was a Skylar Diggins-Smith trade. Okay. Although not to Las Vegas, which if you're starting at the top of the standings.
We'll start with Phoenix here then. We'll do that much. How about that?
I mean, I can give you mine because it was a very simple one. I had Skylar Diggins-Smith in a straight-up swap for Myisha Hines-Allen going to Washington.
Ooh, okay. So, let's start there because I also had one to Washington. I included Ariel Atkins just for... partially so that, but okay. This it's tricky because Phoenix is in a position where they probably don't want to lose her for nothing, which is, in all likelihood, what is going to happen. So, do you think that the return would be that little in a Myisha Hines-Allen, or?
Well, firstly, we don't know how healthy Diggins-Smith is to even play right now. And as you mentioned, she will be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, so you'd be trading for her as a rental for the next month or two, basically. So I can't see a team like Washington giving up someone as good as Atkins, who is under contract, I think, for still another year or two after this season. And yeah, I would be surprised if anyone gave up that much talent for a month and a half of Diggins Smith. Oh no, Atkins is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. In that case, that I guess that makes it a little more likely if they think there's a chance that she might walk away. But no, I mean the premise behind mine with Hines Allen was that basically that deal hasn't worked out in Washington because she's been hurt for the vast majority of it. So it's kind of it would be Phoenix tying up a lot of the cap space that they're going to create at the end of the season because Hines Allen has $180,000 on a deal for next year. So they would be swallowing that and basically taking a gamble that the player that we saw Hines Allen be a couple of years ago in the bubble is still in there somewhere, and if she ever gets healthy, can come back out. And because I think if that player came back, she's a great fit next to Griner, assuming they re-sign Griner in the offseason. And for Washington, it's you're signing a player who you know is one of the best guards in the league when she's healthy and ready to play, and they've had so many injuries as well. You basically bump up your depth and you try and win a title this year if you get Deladon and Atkins and Shakira Austin back before the end of the season.
Yeah, a lot of ifs there that were brought up, and I really like the premise of that trade though. With Myisha Hines Allen, she was included in that deal that I saw for Skylar Diggins-Smith as well. But if you could just bring the talent of Skylar and EDD and Shakira Austin, Ariel Atkins, Natasha Cloud, that's a pretty darn good team. And so I think when it came to looking at Styler trades, I had several teams in mind, where Washington was one of them. I was looking at Indiana, Connecticut, and then a couple that I just kind of threw in there for some fun was Atlanta, as well as Seattle. And I'm curious if you think any of those teams made sense, because I know a Connecticut, where for years it was like, hey, if they can get a superstar guard in there with the amount of bigs that they have, that could be a really dangerous formula for the Sun. But now they have more guards than bigs, it seems. But what do you think of any of those options?
Yeah, I mean, I started off this process by basically splitting the league into buyers and sellers in terms of teams that think they can win a championship might be looking to trade for someone if it was actually possible within the rules. And teams that are sort of expecting to be in the lottery or that would even prefer to be in the lottery rather than sort of slide into a 7th, 8th spot to make the end of the playoffs and then get murdered in the first round, might be looking to trade people away. So, you got at least 5 teams who would probably think they're buyers. You got at least 3 or 4 who would think they're sellers. So yeah, if Diggins Smith is healthy and ready to play, any of the buyers might, if the cost was low enough, be interested. I mean, I doubt Las Vegas would want to upset their chemistry because they're too good to bother even taking the chance. And I don't really see a fit in New York. But once you get past that, I mean, Connecticut might, Dallas might, Washington, as we've discussed, might, Atlanta could. And yeah, I mean, those are the only ones I think would definitely be considered buyers. Then you're getting into maybe teams.
That's fair. Well, and I think also seeing Minnesota's kind of resurgence in the standings as of late, I thought about them. It seems pretty unlikely to put in the players that a Phoenix would want, or the young talent especially. And then Indiana was another one I was curious about for Skylar Diggins-Smith. That's the often rumored one just because of, hey, she went to college in Indiana over at Notre Dame. Do you any of those?
That's
Indiana
the
at
one
all?
where there could theoretically be a way to actually make the maths work in reality as well because of the amount of space that Indiana have. So that might be why that one's come up a bit, as well as obviously her history in the state. I don't see, unless the cost was really quite cheap, in which case you wonder whether there's any point for Phoenix. I don't see why you trade for her as Indiana rather than just waiting to the offseason and making a pitch to her as a free agent. There doesn't seem to be a lot of point to it, to me, basically. I mean, you can argue the sort of get her in the building, try and make her like the place, like the atmosphere of the team, part of the unit, something like that kind of argument. But I think you just wait until January and call up her agent and try and sign her off the street rather than bothering to give up any kind of capital to get hold of her.
And that is a very fair spot to come from, especially if you're Indiana and you're not winning right now, but maybe here in the future, with the continued collection of talent, the draft picks still coming. So I'm right there with you. I think that's probably smart for Indiana as well. Let's jump up the standings to a team that you just mentioned as someone probably not willing to buy for like the style of Dickens Smith, because things have just gone so very well for the Las Vegas Aces. I'll start first with my like ideal trade target, and that's going to be Azurá Stevens. And again, we are throwing Cap into the trash can. But I thought either one of two things, and the first one was a Kirsten Bell and any draft capital for Azurá Stevens, and the next one was an Alicia Clark. And I think this because you have Candace Parker out with injury, and if you wanted a piece for insurance reasons to come in and do what Candace Parker does, probably as close as you're getting off the bench would be an Azurá Stevens. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any Aces trade ideas?
Firstly, I think Clark's too good of a fit to throw into a deal like that.
It's very fair.
I think LA would be reluctant to give Stevens up, just coming from the other side of that deal. I mean, she was one of their big prizes in free agency like 5 months ago. They've got her under contract for next season as well. I'd be surprised if they'd give her up for something like Kirsten Bell. And, I mean, Vegas can't even throw in first-round picks. So you're talking about the, 23rd, 24th pick would be the best of their own seconds. And they've got a couple of other seconds from other teams as well. But, yeah, so I don't think Bell and seconds gets Stevens away from LA. I don't think that's enough. I can see the fit once you've lost Parker for Vegas. I can see why they would be interested in that kind of player. But no, I went slightly different for Vegas, but similar idea in that all they really have to offer is if you still believe Kirsten Bell has promise and can become more of a player than she's been in the first couple of years in Vegas, then she's probably their biggest option to trade away, along with as many second-round picks as anyone wants to take off them, basically.
Very, very true. Yeah, so you said you went in a different direction, and any players in mind?
I went with Seattle, and this was my home for Gabby Williams. I mean, my makeup was Kirsten Bell, throw in Raquana Williams, who Seattle would instantly waive. As many second rounders as it takes, and you get Gabby Williams back and Joyner Holmes thrown in as sort of an insurance post as well to help out in case there's an absolute disaster, because Becky Hammond doesn't seem to want to play Kayla George much unless absolutely necessary. So Holmes would give her another option.
I like that trade. I actually like that trade a lot. I thought with this Vegas team, I thought like win depth, so that does that with Gabby Williams, and then at a big depth, and I think Joyner Holmes makes a lot of sense there too. Just the more optionality, like you mentioned. But I was also considering a shooter. I didn't know if you'd include like a Kia Nurse or a Sammy Whitcomb in a deal like that, but I think I like the two that you bring back to the Aces in this hypothetical trade.
I mean, the issue with Nurse and Whitcomb is they're both under contract next season as well. So if I'm going to at least pay some vague attention to the cap math in this sort of going forward, Like, not necessarily in order to make the trade legal, but in terms of what you're going to do with your roster next season. I'm not sure whether Vegas would want that money tied up for next year as well. So Gabby Williams, in terms of being, useful for the rest of the year, a nice fit on the wing, can play multiple positions, can handle the ball if you need her to. Not that Vegas really need that. They already play small lineups with Alicia Clark at the 4, and I mean Williams can switch a lot as well in the same sort of way, even though she's maybe an inch or two shorter. So yeah, I think the only issue with Williams is obviously that compared to pretty much everyone on Vegas's roster apart from Kia Stokes, she can't shoot. But that's the other theoretical positive to this hypothetical trade, is that you're sending her to the team that turned Jackie Young into the best shooter in the entire league. So in the best case scenario, the ultimate positive timeline, you keep her around into the future as well, hand her to the same people that fixed Jackie Young, and you turn her into Gabby Williams with a jump shot, which,
man.
I mean, means you end up with a genuine all-star caliber kind of player.
You get your 7th or 8th starter on a team with 5 starters.
Absolutely, yeah.
I love that trade. That would be a lot of fun. Again, you know what? Like maybe. I don't know about it for Seattle, but like you said, as many seconds as it would take. All right, that's the Aces for us. Let's move on to the New York Liberty, second in the standings. And for New York, I'm not gonna lie, this team I kind of had a little bit too much fun just considering some possibilities, and obviously impossibilities. But we start with just a quick question on whether or not you would consider trading a few of your stars to bring back a Brittany Griner or a Talia Copper.
Who are you trading?
You're trading Jonquil Jones, and probably it's one of Benai Delaney or Sabrina Ionescu. Yep.
I mean,
so
for someone again who isn't under, I mean, we should mention that there is the theoretical possibility that when someone's traded in one of these deals, they could sign an extension as part of the deal.
Ooh,
so
okay.
It is possible to sort of add years on to someone's contract, while you're doing all of these negotiations. So it wouldn't necessarily be a rental for 2 months of Copper or Griner, but wow, I mean.
So and
go ahead.
My thought here is well, before we've seen what we've seen from Jonquil Jones as of recently, first half of the season it wasn't the best showing. I thought this team of all stars, one of the super teams in the league, can they maybe trade a few of those pieces to get better at one position and maybe become a little more well-rounded? Because they do have a deep bench as well. But yeah, that's where the thought for a BG or a Talia Copper came in.
I mean, I wouldn't be trading Ionescu because they need the offensive production from the perimeter and the shooting that they get from her on the outside, because you don't really get that from Vandersloot, and you get it sort of in and out from Laney. If
Marine
you were bringing in Copper, who's been inconsistent herself and only produced, 1 game in 3 since she's been here this year. The thing is, we've been giving sort of New York a semi-pass on some of the failings they've had this year, because we've been talking about sort of how much they've had to try and find some chemistry between all of these new pieces. If you sort of semi-blow it up again with a month and a half left in the year, you're kind of inviting those issues back into the group again. If you can get someone like Griner or Copper cheap, then great. But if you're having to give up a Jonquil Jones who said she wants to be in New York, so presumably you're expecting her to re-sign at the end of the year. Who knows whether Copper or Griner, if you acquired them, would want to do that. I think it's unlikely, basically. But I applaud the the reach. I struggled to come up with anything for New York because I think the main thing they probably need is perimeter defense because that's the failing, the fact that it's too easy to get past the Vandersloot, Ionescu, or Johannes backcourt. But there's no point bringing anyone in who won't play. So what's the point bringing in a defensive stopper if all the minutes are still going to go to the players there that you're trying to fix the problem with? So yeah, unless you do make like a major move like you're coming up with, I struggled to come up with anything that made sense for New York, that there was anything worth doing.
All right, so the couple of other ideas that I had was a little more realistic because of this fact, but I focused on the perimeter defense. And the first one I'm thinking is one of Stephanie Dolson or Hanshu for AD Dur. And that can come in and provide AD Dur back to New York, but a little bit of perimeter defense. And then the other one I had, it's kind of the same vein that you had with Gabby Williams, but Gabby Williams coming to New York for Maureen Johannes and Niara Sabally.
Yeah, I'm not sure Durr gives you much more than what they have already. Obviously, there's they know her, they know what they'd be bringing in, but yeah, Williams maybe I could see that. Again, it gives you an extra ball handler if you want it. She's a better perimeter defender who might play, although you lose the floor stretching. Yeah, I was thinking that if they traded anyone away, then there would be lots of teams interested in someone like Hans Yu, certainly. Maybe, yeah, that's reasonable.
All right, you know what, Richard, I'll take that from this end over here. We'll move on from New York because they already have a lot of talent. They're probably fine. Looking forward to those matchups with the Aces this month. But we'll touch over to Connecticut, where I didn't really have a lot of places to go. Did you have much luck for the Sun?
This was one place where I went blockbuster rather than going New York.
All right.
I sent Jewel Lloyd to Connecticut. For, in theory, it's not enough. Seattle wouldn't do it, but for Dejanay Carrington and a 2024 first round pick.
Oh, yeah. I guess you'd have to be feeling very unconfident that Jewel Lloyd would be staying with you in this scenario.
Yeah, I think there's two scenarios, one at either end of the scale. Either you think she's going, so you think, right, we'll cash her in for whatever we can get, or you think she might come back even if you send her away, so you get what you can and say, we still want you, come talk to us at the end of the season when you're a free agent, and then you're theoretically getting what you can get in a trade and maybe signing her back anyway. So that's obviously an unlikely scenario, but when we're making stuff up, we might as well make stuff up.
Amen to that. And you know what? It's a very fun scenario as well. Jewel Lloyd would be awesome with that Connecticut Sun team. The deals I thought of too also included Dejanay Carrington, and I wasn't feeling great about them, where it was go and get a bid because Bree Jones is out, and that's like a Kalani Brown, a Hanju, a Stephanie Dolson. You can have a pitch in any of those scenarios. The one that I thought was probably most interesting was like knowing you probably can't go get Skylar Diggins-Smith, you can't go get Jewel Lloyd, but maybe you can go try and get Kelsey Mitchell. And that trade for me was Dejanay Carrington, who is partners with Melissa Smith over in Indiana. Sent her to Indiana with, I don't know, like 0-0, Leah Brown, maybe a Ty Harris, and back the other way, you can send an Erica Wheeler out or a Victoria Vivians too, but unlikely to happen. Just middle of the season, obviously that trade's unlikely to happen, but that was kind of my favorite one that I could come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if Indiana were willing to give Mitchell up for that kind of package when she's basically their one reliable piece on the perimeter. Everyone else is sort of a fill-in or a backup or someone who you're waiting to see when the next upgrade comes along for anyone else on that sort of collection of players they've got there on the perimeter. Yeah, I'd be surprised if Indiana were willing to do that, even ignoring the numbers and all the cap math and everything that we're taking out of the equation.
Very, very fair. Yeah, so Connecticut was the tricky one. I like that you went blockbuster with it, though. That's a lot more fun to think about Jewel Lloyd in a Connecticut Sun jersey. All right, all right. We'll run over to Dallas now, fourth in the standings. And a lot of people's pick to like surprise and make the finals, or I've heard one recently that was win the finals, and I don't know about that, but if they're gonna do that, why not help them out with a trade? Did you have anything in mind that maybe could propel this team? And I guess the question comes up again, like, hey, could anything be in play for Kalia Topper, who I think is the one spot where this Dallas team could vastly improve in the starting lineup?
Where are you going to play her, though?
So, okay, hear me out on this trade where we go Natasha Howard, the young pieces for Kalia Topper. If Chicago is like, I know she's out, let's try and go get something for her. Natasha Howard comes out of the starting lineup. Satu Sabli moves over to the 4. Kalia Topper hits the 3 spot.
Howard's been such a big piece of what they've done this season
Very true.
in Dallas. I mean, yeah, obviously Sabali's improvement has got a lot of the press, and Arike always draws a lot of attention. But Howard has settled in there immediately and really been a big piece of their improvement. That would be a major shake-up. Obviously, you're requiring a very good player in Copper, but Sabali's done a lot of her good stuff from the 3 rather than the 4 as well. I think that would be too big of a change for a team that feels quite good about where they are, which is part of why I went smaller in terms of a Dallas trade.
All right, let's hear it.
I sent them Courtney Williams from Chicago, basically to offer a little more behind Arike in terms of a production as a guard, as a shooter. She's basically been playing a lot of sort of pseudo point guard in Chicago as well, so she could play next to Arike in certain lineups. And Arike's playing a ridiculous amount of minutes, so even just having a bit more backup for her so that she gets a little bit more rest would be a help. I had written down for a 2024 first round pick, and that they would basically argue over which one it would be, because Dallas currently owns Chicago's pick. So it would be a matter of whether you're getting Dallas's, which is probably going to be in the sort of 8-9 range, or whether Chicago get their own back, which could be 4-5, maybe even if they collapse for the rest of the season, sneak into the lottery. Who knows where it goes up if you get lucky in the draw.
Hey, I love this deal with putting Courtney Williams. Courtney Williams, who this year has really stepped into a point guard role as well. But, oh my gosh, that is a fascinating trade. I think you're right that, oh gosh. Chicago's an interesting one. When we get to the sky, it's going to be... I have a few different thoughts on that Chicago team, but I like that deal. I think that really does help them a lot, and it keeps a lot of the foundation in place. Obviously, you're trading no players in this deal.
Yeah.
All right. The other one that I thought kind of on a smaller scale was for the Seattle duo, where you could get one of Tia Nurse or Sammy Whitcomb, just to help with shooting a little bit for a Dallas team that is not the best at shooting, especially from 3, as well as like, hey, can we also bring in Gabby Williams, and can we do this by trading our young pieces to a rebuilding Seattle team, like a Maddie Segrist, a Veronica Burton. So that was one I thought about as well.
Yeah, I mean that sort of swap makes sense in terms of Seattle very much in a rebuild. Dallas have started to talk themselves out of being a rebuild team anymore, so it's then a matter of how much do you like your youngsters and how much do you want to add now and think you can win right now. Yeah,
and we'll leave it there because that's exactly what I'm thinking for that sort of a trade. I do like that Courtney Williams edition though. That's pretty good stuff. We'll head to Atlanta for the Dream, and I had lots of ideas for the Dream, but when I looked at this Atlanta team, I thought, hey, they could probably use a bunch of different spots whether it be like another bid in the rotation, a premier point guard, or even just some shooters. But who did you kind of look at for this Atlanta team? Because I really did consider like a Skylar Diggins Smith or a Kelsey Mitchell in terms of this category.
I I for different reasons than New York, I kind of struggled with Atlanta because I think they're still a year or two away and one major player away from being a real contender. And like you say, that player could be a point guard, although if she can stay healthy and give them like enough time to tell, then Aari McDonald might be that point guard for the future. In which case, it's probably a big because you've got your wings sorted out already with Alicia Gray and Ryan Howard. So I think they're probably most likely to find that in free agency rather than in a deal because I don't know what you're trading that's going to get you someone good enough back to be worth making a deal for. So, yeah, unless we start getting into the sort of wild swings you're talking about, then I struggled to come up with it. So tell me what you had and we'll argue that through.
I love it. Okay, so I was looking at Letitia Amahir. I apologize.
I'm here, yeah.
Yeah, Amahir. Okay. With like a Haley Jones. For to go get like a Kelsey Mitchell, and those are two like very enticing young prospects in my opinion. I don't know how maybe around the league that would look, but if you could attach some stuff and go get like a Kelsey Mitchell there, or I'm trying to look for the other options I had where it was like a Talia Topper or a Brittany Griner, just ridiculous, out of this world. So I looked actually. If you want to touch on the Kelsey Mitchell idea first, we'll go there, and then I have some more realistic ones that I actually liked for this Atlanta team.
No, well, I mean, my problem with Kelsey Mitchell would be that, like I said, I think they're set on the wing, and Mitchell's really not a point guard, even if she does like the ball in
True.
her hands. So where are you finding minutes to play Mitchell, Gray, and Ryan Howard as much as they want to play and deserve to play? I mean, Howard could play a little four as she sort of develops in small lineups.
I think
Mitchell
that's
can
my
play a little
idea.
point guard, but I, again, especially if you think you're trying to win right now, if you think you're good enough to be a contender this year, then I think that's a bit of an awkward fit because none of them really is a point guard. So you'd be just sort of trying to piece together the lineups there to get the distribution and the ball handling you'd need.
Yeah, you're like searching for the playmaking there. I think that's very fair. So, well, I won't be as ridiculous with Atlanta, but some of the ideas I thought where you can get another big or a point guard was A.D. Durr and Danielle Robinson, and trading those two for a Marine Johannes and either Stephanie Dolson or Han Shu, where you bring a big and a point guard into play. And it brings some perimeter defense over to New York that they might need. But thoughts on that one? I did bring that up slightly with New York earlier.
Yeah, I can kind of see where you're going. I mean, Johannes isn't really a point guard either, so you could argue you're taking sort of point guard elements away rather than adding them in terms of giving up Robinson, bringing Johannes back. And I mean, Shu would be a play for the future, I think, more than for the now. I'm not sure how much the big you're adding there is an upgrade on what they've got already. When you've got pieces like Billings and Coffey and Hillman and Rupert around Cheyenne Parker already, I'm not sure whether you're you're making much of an upgrade, bringing in Dalton, who's been hurt all season, and Shu's been in another country for most of the season.
Very, very fair. I think I'm gonna start with Johannes, where a part of me just like loves the flashy passing, the stealthy
Well,
shot,
I love her as a player, absolutely.
and I want to like buy in. I want her to like give her the reins to a team and see what can happen with her at the point guard spot. So I'm probably like just a little daydreaming there in terms of the return that you could maybe get for a Marine Johannes. When it comes back to um, kind of, you mentioned the Naz Hillman, Monique Billings, and I'm blanking on the Nia Coffey. I
Yeah.
would have liked to think of some trades where you get rid of one or two of them just to kind of clean out what is a very strong front court and maybe clear some more minutes for one or two of those pieces. But I didn't really find much in that reign. The one idea that I had to bring in a point guard and a shooter was trading. Like if you could trade Nas Hillman, Aaron McDonald, and or Haley Jones or LA, and so a lot of those young pieces going out to bring in Mariah Jefferson and Sophie Cunningham from Phoenix. What are your thoughts on that one?
So you've got like Jefferson and Cunningham coming in for bigs and
Nas Hillman, Haley Jones or LA, and you can include Aaron McDonald. You don't have to. But like I think about surrounding the two wings that you have, put a shooter in Sophie Cunningham, as well as the point guard, and we know she can be a good facilitator. It was really strong in Minnesota last year. Has been up and down in Phoenix, I'd say, and Mariah Jefferson.
yeah, I mean, I don't mind it for Atlanta, certainly in terms of you get a point guard who can shoot and has a little more experience than McDonald, and a wing who can add shooting as well when Gray or Howard are getting some rest, and you've got enough posts to cover the space going in and out. But I'm not sure Phoenix do it, and it kind of feels like rearranging the deck chairs to a certain extent that you're just sort of moving pieces around to move pieces around. I'm not sure whether I could see teams doing it when they're building a roster in the off season, but with a month left in the regular season, maybe not in terms of how much of a shake-up it does to your chemistry. And I mean, we know that Cunningham is something of a divisive figure. I think it's fair to
Very,
say
very
in
good point.
in terms of her attitude. I think you'd have to be careful when you're bringing her in. You'd need to talk to your team about whether they like her and whether they think it's a good idea, basically.
No, I think that's a very good point that I meant to bring up at the start. We just haven't gotten to one of my Sophie Cunningham like weird trade machinations so far until just now with Atlanta. Um,
I tried to sign her with multiple teams in the fake off-season podcast that we do over at her Hoopstats. So yeah, I'm a fan of her play as well. You just have to take what comes with it.
yeah, I am with you there. I think when it comes to Phoenix making a move like that, I looked at it as like, hey, we're probably trying to get a little bit younger. We're gonna see if we can find a piece here or there and that's where the Haley Jones, Nas Hillman, Aaron McDonald come in. But I see what you're saying with just kind of rearranging deck chairs over in Phoenix because there's a lot going on there.
I mean, the other no to back up your point, the other reason you do it in Phoenix is it would create extra cap space because both Cunningham and Jefferson are under contract for next season. So if you're trying to blow it up so that you can just try and bring people in off the street in free agency to sort of help Griner and Tarasi give it one last push next season, then yeah, if you're cleaning the decks, you know, you could chase after Copper or Necker or both in the off season to come and join and build another super team to go with everybody else.
There you go. Okay, I'll take it. I'll hold on to that and say, hey, we're That's not a horrible one now. But we'll move over to the sixth seed, and that is Minnesota. And this was another one I considered for like, hey, are they in a position to go make a blockbuster move? Would you even consider it? Yeah, so let's start there. Richard, would you consider a deal for just a vastly improved star to put next to your star Nafisa Collier?
They were in my maybes list in terms of buyers or sellers, which direction you're going in, because I'm not sure they expected to really be 500 and in a fairly solid playoff position at this stage. So that kind of changes up your thinking because you're no longer looking to a lottery pick. If you can get anyone who resembles a star without giving up Collier or Miller, then why not? But if they're only under contract for the rest of the season, then you probably, again, don't want to give up too much. If it's as long as it's only players, they probably don't want to give up Shepherd either. But that's about it. Looking down their roster, it's Collier,
Yeah, would you
Miller, and then you're not too attached to pretty much anybody.
you wouldn't include Dorothy Uhas in that group of maybe?
I Yeah, that was the name I was sort of working on. Obviously, she's had a good rookie season for someone you took in the second round, but I think you'd include her if you needed to include her to get the right kind of deal done. If you see what I mean, if it's a deal you think is worth it.
So this was another one where I considered with the Sophie and Mariah Jefferson trade to go get Mojef back to Minnesota, where she was so good under head coach Cheryl Reeve, as well as a shooter on the wing in Sophie Cunningham. And I was sending out Dorothy Uhas and Ariel Powers because Powers just we've got to take her out of Minnesota, I believe. But then Dorothy Uhas is like a big question mark on whether or not you'd be willing to take a short term improvement just even because you're getting rid of such a good young prospect.
Yeah, I don't think that would be enough.
Oh,
I mean, they basically let Jefferson walk because they didn't want to pay her that contract and felt like Lindsay Allen could do a pretty decent impression of the same thing for less than half the price, and have been proved pretty much right.
that's true.
So yeah, I don't think that would be enough for Minnesota to want to give up a package for those two. I think it would need to be someone more among the group that you've been trying to trade around the league already, but then you get back into the are we only getting them for a couple of months and we're probably not good enough to win a title anyway. If you threw Kalia Copper onto this squad without having to give much up, they're probably still not winning a championship in terms of competing with Vegas and New York and Connecticut and so on.
That's very fair. So I kind of had those like all the trades that I liked, I've put in bold, and then I've italicized some of the ones where it was like maybe not. If, but that was a Jewel Lloyd, that was a Brittany Griner, that was a Thalia Topper, like I've been mentioning. Did you have any trades in mind for Minnesota that could help even without like mortgaging so much of the future?
No, I think they're in an awkward position because of the like being better than they anticipated. Like I said, I you could argue they should try and make a trade to get worse in order to get
Ooh,
back into the lottery. But I'm not sure
interesting.
what that would be because how do you try and send Kayla McBride somewhere to sort of to make your shooting worse? Um, yeah, I didn't come up with much for Minnesota, like I said, because they were sort of the bottom of the group where you might consider them buyers, but not really in a position to try and turn themselves into a contender. So I
Hmm.
didn't have a lot for Minnesota.
All right,
I
so
imagine they sorry, I was going to say I imagine they'd happily give up Powers if the money and numbers worked somewhere. Because she's barely played this year, and they've got enough other players for the same spots. So why not if you can get anything back?
and that was aerial powers for like I was looking at different options for aerial powers where like maybe it's one of the bigs over in Atlanta that is kind of in that rotation. I don't know. So there, I don't really have a bunch in mind in terms of just getting aerial powers out of there. I did think maybe if you're Washington and you need some more shooting, maybe you can get Rachel Banham along with aerial powers for like a Brittany Sykes. I don't know that that's entirely worth it, though. So I didn't
No,
really.
I think Sykes has worked out too well in Washington. They wouldn't be giving her up for that group. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I'm with you on maybe trading aerial powers. I think the Taylor McBride is an interesting one that I also considered, but didn't really find like one of my favorite deals that was sending Taylor McBride any which way. I considered like an Atlanta or even below with going to Phoenix or something like that, but yeah, I think you're right to say Minnesota is kind of in an interesting place where it could be either way, and they very well could consider just hey, let's trade and try and get a little bit worse right now.
Yeah, I mean, they've won so many games lately that it's probably going to be difficult for them to lose their way back down to ninth, to be honest,
Yes,
because the teams below them aren't winning enough games to get past them.
very very true. All right, the Washington Mystics as we hit kind of the second half, and we'll try and speed this up a little bit as we get to the bottom of the standings. We've already touched on Phoenix as well, but the Washington Mystics currently in seventh and dealing with injuries galore. I looked at a team I also considered for kind of to fill that three spot, the small forward spot, and that was a Talia Topper, Benijah Laney. I considered the Skylar Diggins Smith, the Jewel Lloyd, but uh, and aside from that, I looked at maybe like could you trade for Sammy Whitcomb or Tia Nurse over in Seattle? Could you trade for Sophie Cunningham just for some more shooting on this Washington team that I think would really help with the spacing and kind of the problems they have with kind of a lot of their players liking to go down low. Maybe you can bring in some shooters, but did you have any Washington trade ideas?
Well, the one I mentioned earlier was Hines Allen for Diggins Smith was Washington, but that was my major Washington deal. But like you said, yeah, I mean, adding some offense would be a reasonable way to go, sort of working on the assumption that their defense will get back to being good if and when Deladon and Austin are back in the lineup. Because when they were there, this was the best defense in the league. And then when they got hurt, they're pretty much the worst defense in the league. So if you sort of work on the assumption it's going to come back, then you try and help out the offense with, yeah, shooting works. Although, again, you wonder about minutes, and sometimes you're trading for people that how much better are they than what you've got? If assuming Atkins is expected back at some point this season, then you got Cloud, Sykes, and Atkins as your starters. You've still got Walker Kimbrough and Lee Meng coming off the bench. You maybe even got Christy Tolliver if she ever gets healthy. So is someone like Cunningham that much of an upgrade over what you've already got? Would be the question you make when you're sort of wondering whether it's worth giving anyone up for a player like that.
That's fair, and I'm gonna be. I think I'd regret it if I didn't throw this one trade out there. That's just crazy. It will never happen. But
Like 90% of the things we've been talking about. So.
absolutely, 100%. It's the title of the episode. Fake trades galore. We've got the. Okay, yes, my idea was with the New York Liberty, and they need some perimeter defense. So two of the Ariel Atkins, Brittany Sykes, and Natasha Cloud coming to New York for a Sabrina Ionescu.
I mean, no, it's not unreasonable. I thought about suggesting something similar earlier in the season,
Okay.
like who would sort of which side turns down the UNESCO for Atkins kind of deal, because obviously in terms of an electric scorer, UNESCO jumps off the page with those skills, but Atkins is the significantly better two-way player. I think basically both teams say no. It's one of those deals where, everyone would be unhappy, so everyone says, let's not. I don't think you get two of those pieces out of Washington, but Ionescu's a star, so she sells tickets as well. Maybe like the Tebows think we can build up a player to be 90% of a Cloud or an Atkins, while we can't find someone to imitate what Ionescu can do, even to a 90%. So
Interesting.
yeah, I think both sides end up saying no. Basically, it's one of those.
Yeah, hey, and I also looked at if UNESCO was in Washington, she would have the bids behind her to maybe help with some of those defensive ailments, especially with one of the backcourt mates still being there to help with the perimeter defense. But no, okay, I'll take that. I'm glad I threw it out there for Washington. Sorry, we'll move to eighth, and that is the last playoff team right now in Chicago. Did you have any Chicago trades in mind? Do you think for a second that they think, hey, Talia Topper, unlikely to stay with us? Where could she end up going?
Like I said before, I sold Courtney Williams to Dallas in theory to try and recoup some of this sort of draft capital that they gave up in the Mabry deal before James Wade jumped ship. I can't really see them dealing Copper away. Obviously, in reality, we have all the cap issues as well. But I think it's similar to Lloyd in Seattle, where the chance of being able to keep the player is worth more than what you'd get from someone in a deal. Basically, the possibility that they're going to stay is the greater value than what you're going to get in a deal. Even though if you're going to turn it into a rebuild, you need picks that they don't have right now. So if someone was willing to give up a decent first rounder, then fair enough. But who are you getting that from? The problem with there being buyers and sellers at this stage in the season is that obviously the buying teams are the ones who are going to be drafting in the late stages of the first round. So the picks aren't worth as much unless they own the rights to someone else's.
That's a really interesting point. I think what I kind of thought of before we get back to Chicago, but in that element where you're trading one of like the very best players in the league, I thought about maybe the bottom tiers where they can trade one of their best players in the league to go team up with like Atalia Topper in Chicago on the eighth seed, go team up with Jewel Lloyd in Seattle, or vice versa. So two of the lower tier teams right now in the W, but I didn't really know in terms of Chicago's trades, like, would you trade all the young pieces? Would it even be enough for Brittany Griner, for Jewel Lloyd, for like Dick Crazy and Dodit Styler, Dickon Smith? I didn't really like any of those options. I didn't like without the draft picks, limited contracts for those several players. So I wasn't sure. It does like say, hey, Talia, we're going and we're trading for the superstar. You should stay with us. We're trying to build around you. But I was looking more towards like trading Courtney Williams, like you brought up, and the one where I just thought it was the most ironic, Richard, was Marina Mabry for like an Azare Stevens, maybe. And you have any thoughts there?
I mean, I tried to come up with something for Mabry as well to you sort of recoup it and
Yes.
sort of turn back the clock. And I don't think anyone's giving up what they gave up in order to be able to sign her. So who would want, the next 2 years of Mabry on their books for over $400,000? It's, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
I think you're gonna struggle to make that deal right now, and I mean maybe it starts to look more palatable in the off season when one of these years is off, so it only looks like two more, and if someone sort of strikes out in actual free agency, then maybe they take Mabry off their hands sort of as the second choice to fill a spot when you didn't manage to pick up a free agent. I think it's difficult to get it done now.
Yeah, and I just like even just to sit on the Marina Mabry for Azure Stevens for a second, like they could have probably found a way to keep Azure Stevens and then not traded all of that for Marina Mabry in the offseason. So like that becomes like I just think you couldn't do that just for fear of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did all that only for it to result in what could have just been so easy in the offseason.
And yeah, I think LA are still hoping for
Yeah.
big things from Stevens. So yeah, it's more a matter of wait and see on her rather than cash it in for someone who you had years ago
Yes.
and gave up to Dallas.
All right. All right. We'll kind of go through the non-playoff teams here. Starting with LA, because this one might take the longest amount of time. Did you have any LA-based trades? Did they get someone to go pair with Neta?
Again, I think LA should be selling because
Oh.
with how the season has gone, admittedly some of it's come down to injuries, but it's also just because this is a mishmash of a roster that's still trying to rebuild.
Hmm.
Essentially, it's sort of a rebuild on the fly without getting too bad. But I think they're better off in the lottery than trying to sneak into the playoffs. So, but you but you don't want to trade away the pieces that you think are going to be part of the squad that you want to rebuild with. So you're not going to give up Lexi Brown even if she got healthy. You probably don't want to give up Jordan Canada because you likely think she's your point guard of the future.
Yes.
Stevens, like I said, I think they are hoping for big things from. Necker is still the tentpole piece, even though she's hitting her mid-30s and she's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. Yeah, again, as we talked about with other teams, I doubt they want to give her up because there's too much benefit to keeping her around. And then who's left, basically? Who's left that anyone's
Yeah.
going to give you anything that's worth it for? I mean, if we took the numbers out of it completely, would Connecticut want Jasmine Thomas back? Just to be like a veteran option as another point guard possibility along instead of Heidemann or the one I'm forgetting that they got from Dallas, whose name is escaping me right now.
Ty Harris. Ty Harris.
Ty Harris, yeah, they're current two sort of
Yeah.
point guard options, but not having to play too much point guard because Alyssa Thomas does half of it anyway. But yeah, I don't see too many pieces for them to trade away once you take away those ones that they probably see as part of their future.
So I liked what you're saying with the future, and you seem to be pretty high on them trying to keep Azure Stevens, which leads me to like maybe because I think it's kind of a logjam down there with Neto Dumate, Dearica Hamby, Azure Stevens. So if you could get rid of one of those, probably a Dearica Hamby, and
You could try and trade Hamby again. I mean, who knows how happy she'd be about it. I think it was a very short list of places she was willing to go from Las Vegas. So yeah, I she might not be keen, but she might go if she wants to keep getting paid.
That's fair. My fake trade, just because I thought LA maybe this season if they want to make the playoffs, did a few more wins. I put the deal together. Zaya Cook with Dearica Hamby for Sophie Cunningham and Michaela Animwere. Maybe that's a little too much on one side or the other. But that one, as well as I put Cook with Shania Dumate to get Tiffany Mitchell and Ariel Powers. A few more wins in the door on a team that has a lot of guards, has a lot of bigs. Maybe you can take one of each and go get a couple of wins. But I don't know. It's not great for LA.
Yeah, I mean her numbers aren't great, but Cook has looked reasonable in LA. So yeah, you might get some level of interest there from other teams in terms of, maybe she turns into something. Um, yeah, all of those sorts of that it's all reasonable in terms of obviously I'm used to looking at it in terms of whether it's legal or not in reality. But once you take that out, those are reasonable to sort of add little pieces around their core, and they've had so many injuries that adding some depth would not be a bad idea just in general in terms of people who might be healthy and ready to contribute on a nightly basis.
Yeah. Hey, that's very, very fair. Um, we touched on Phoenix already. We'll go Indiana and Seattle real fast, if you will. I already brought up that Indiana trade that I liked with Dejounte Carrington coming in and sitting Kelsey Mitchell out. I saw what you were saying though. So the other one I thought was, hey, maybe an Erica Wheeler, a Victoria Vivian's out the door to bring in like a Honshu. I've really liked I would like the fit. I've talked about it before with Honshu running with Aaliyah Boston and Alyssa Smith. I just think that adds a little bit more size with the outside shot that Honshu brings. But it was Wheeler and Vivian's, some perimeter defense, some shooting for Marine Johannes and Honshu. That was one that I liked for this Indiana squad.
I would have no problem with that. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you're also getting two big contracts that aren't great off the books in Indiana. So in theory, you could then spend that on free agents, although they've had a lot of trouble attracting free agents to actually come and play in Indiana. But maybe once they're turning into a slightly better team, then you start attracting people to come and play for you, regardless of the city or the state that the team is in.
All right, yeah.
Um,
And we talked about Skylar Diggins Smith too as a potential not trade for, but free agency put your all into going and maybe getting her.
and as long as they manage to stay no higher than ninth in the standings, they're probably going to have the highest odds of the number one pick, which, in the perfect universe becomes Caitlin Clark. But who the hell knows in terms of who's going to declare for the draft and everything like that.
Exactly.
Apart from the ones we talked about already, I was just doing like piecemeal deals. I had Emma Cannon going to Vegas as a backup big.
Oh.
Because obviously having lost Candice Parker and they're being very sort of reticent about whether she's expected to play at all over the rest of this season. Cannon's been in Vegas before, so they know what they'd be getting. And she, as far as I know, has been no kind of disruption if she doesn't get any minutes off the bench. So she would be, an insurance big who can give you a burst of scoring on the right night and fill in when you need minutes.
Yeah, I mean Emma Cannon kind of stepping up recently has been really fun to watch. I'm based in Indiana, so I got to see a little bit of that live in person. But I like that trade for Indiana. Lastly, here, Richard, we'll touch on Seattle, who
Sell.
okay, selling. I'm trying to see if I had any trades in that world. I obviously brought up the one I had with Niara Sabali and Marine Johannes coming in, and you're selling Gabby Williams, Kia Nurse, maybe a pick here or there. I don't really know in terms of any other selling deals. Did you have one?
I mean, I had the one we mentioned with, in theory, sending Lloyd to Connecticut, which is obviously unlikely, and sending Williams and Holmes to Vegas. Everything else, I mean, I would be, happily answering the phone to anybody, pretty much. I don't particularly want the next year of Kia Nurse's deal, so if anyone wants to take $142,500 of Kia Nurse in 2024 off my hands, you can have it for pretty much nothing. I don't think anyone's going to want Mercedes Russell either, but I would happily give up her $160,000. Because I mean, the way that Dulcie Fankam Mengiadu
Yes.
has played this year, I think they'd much rather give the minutes to her than to Russell and wait and see what she can do. But I think they're going to struggle to move that contract. Pretty much, yeah. Anyone would be up for grabs and on offer for anything young, anything cheap that might be useful in a rebuild. Because I don't think I don't think you're bringing in a star at this point to sort of say to Jewel Lloyd, look what we've got here, re-sign, please. So, yeah, I think it's any sort of small deal that you can get done. And, I mean, someone like Gabby Williams might be happy to go, even though, she re-signed late in the year, but you could give her a chance if she went to a Vegas or a New York or a Connecticut. You're going to somewhere where you might win a championship. And this could be her last season in the WNBA for a while if prioritization keeps her out the next year or two. So maybe, that could be positive for her.
All right. You know what? I think that was a nice positive spin for Seattle. The one that I did have that wasn't sell, it was like, hey, let's. Because I think they're 4 games out of the 8th spot, which is not. It's a lot of games for where we're at in the season. But, like, we saw them.
When you've only won 7 all year, yeah, four is a fair few. But yeah, anyway.
The one I had was for De'Arca Hamby, kind of to clear that. Like you said, Tia Nurse, that contract. And Tammy Whitcomb going to LA. But I think I'm with you in terms of selling if you're Seattle. Like you said, 7 wins all year. They have won a couple recently, but even still. Richard, that was a lot of fun. Oh, you wanted to touch on Seattle?
No, I was just going to say that even if they were trying to win more right now, then Whitcomb's actually been quite a big part of how well they've played lately. So giving her up would be taking another step backwards from that, because you'd end up handing the point guard stuff back to Jade Melbourne or Ivana Dojkic, who are the people you've gone away from already. So,
yep, yeah. That is true. All right. Well, that was 12 teams, a lot of nonsense, none of it likely to happen, and the trade deadline just moments away. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show. I mean, I had fun doing this exercise and just being crazy like that.
Yep, been fun.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining the Pro Basketball Show. Go find all of Richard's work. He does a great job carving the W over at Her Hoop Stats. Richard, thank you so much for joining APBShow.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, make sure to follow and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Make sure to follow on Twitter and Instagram at APBShow, and follow me at the AC Willett 22. Thank you so much for tuning in for a Pro Basketball Show. I am Andrew Willett.